Hey. A little Depeche Mode. Depeche a la mode. Hey everybody, I'm happy to have you here on a Thursday night. It's a rainy Thursday. Well, rainy, it's been drizzling, rainy all day. So we just creating that ambiance, and we've got a good night ahead of us because it's a perfect setting to talk with someone like Mike King about one of his cases that he's working right now. Very mysterious case about a child cemetery, newborns, out there in Utah, connected to a Mormon cult. A lot of that going on out there in Utah. But we're going to be talking about this tonight in the first half. We're welcoming back Mike King of Profiling Evil. That's going to be a lot of fun. And in the second half, we're going to stretch out a little bit, and we're going to do a couple other things, including we're going to listen to, I'm sorry, but I just feel inspired to do it. Can't hold my tongue on this one. I just want to listen to Whoopi Goldberg just for a little bit. She's an animal, as you all know. It's got a lot of animal friends on that show, and I just want to listen to it for a little bit and hopefully inspire some second half calls, because there is some richness there. A lot of richness there. So I'm hoping that you guys and gals are along for the whole long haul tonight. A really good ride that we have ahead of us. Last night was a wonderful show with Ilana Freeland. Just really great radio. And I hope that you enjoy that too, whenever the hell it's most convenient. But it's April 11th, 2024. And here's what we have on tap for the Thursday night edition. Well, I already told you. That's what we have. I want to thank my sponsors, BlueMonsterPrep.com, for being there for this audience, for being members of this audience for so long. It is one of those years that everybody should be taking inventory of what they got in their cupboards, what they have in their basements, things that are non-perishable. It's not enough to go out there and get a bunch of instant, mashed potato mix if something shit hits the fan. We're talking about you need longevity out of your equipment, whether it be the food, the water filtration, first aid, and especially communication. All there on BlueMonsterPrep.com. You use promo code FRANKLY for free shipping. But go to QuiteFrankly.tv, the affiliates page. There's really wonderful businesses there. You got the Quite Frankly Elevation Blend Coffee. There's all the merchandise. And there's gold and silver from Wise Wolf. You can do monthly plans with them. Get your first ounces of silver. They treat you very, very well. Botanical chocolates with Yes Cacao. Done. Zip, zip, zip. All right, tomorrow when Matt is in, I think Matt's going to be in for Friday night. It should be a good night. I have some inspiring things to do and some funny things to do. It's just Friday night. On Monday, 6 Degrees of Separation. Get in there. Tell us what bank robber you were related to. I want to know about who's in your lineage. That's on the forum on QuiteFrankly.tv, pinned to the top, so go and check it out. There's more. We got Fleckus Friday coming up at the end of April. Timothy Alberino, Brooks Agnew, they're coming on the beginning of May. May 17th. Write this one in your books, ladies and gentlemen. May 17th. I've got three old boys from my Little League teams. I got Everett, I got Christian, and I've got Kevin. They were on my 2009, 2010 teams around there, travel teams, all that. So all these years later, I think, that was well over 10 years ago. So they're at least 21. I think they're all getting like masters and stuff like that. Or maybe not. Maybe they're not that impressive. I don't know. But they'll be in with, they said, I got in touch with them. I said, hey, listen, you want to come on the show? The one kid said, been waiting for years for this, coach. So this will be fun. So it'll be a little bit of a reminiscing, shooting the shit on May 17th. You get to see some of the kids that I don't know. I guess I had some kind of an impact. Hopefully. We'll see what kind of impact I made. What do they remember about me? From 11, 12, just about to turn 13. What do you remember about me? That'll be funny. I'm probably going to be disappointed. To be honest, probably going to be disappointed. But either way, we'll be able to do all that together. And I'm so happy you are with me tonight to do more. And also at the end of tonight's show at 9 o'clock, right there on QuiteFrankly.tv, where we will be hanging out already by the time we get to intermission, on QuiteFrankly.tv at 9 o'clock when this all ends, After Hours kicks in, and it's brought to you by our friends at the All Things Art Bell Rumble channel. And we have a 5-hour throwback coast-to-coast block of O.J. Simpson saga episodes, call-in shows when it was all happening from Bronco to trial. Of course, you know, O.J. Simpson died today. We'll get into that in just a little bit. But just remember, at the end of tonight's show, the fun is going to continue deep into the night, and the chat room on QuiteFrankly.tv will be alive and cooking. So you get to take a listen to that, go into a little bit of a time capsule block of shows, and talk to people about your memories. If you are that old, I'm old enough. I didn't really understand what the hell was going on. I just always thought that O.J. Simpson was innocent because all I knew was the Naked Gun movies. I'm like 9, 10 years old. I'm trying to find ways with some of my friends to make him innocent, to prove that he's innocent. Why? I wasn't watching the trial. I don't know anything. I didn't know anything about the evidence back then. I didn't listen to that horrible things like the horrible 911 call from Nicole Brown. Yo, I mean, that's all you need. As far as character witness goes, that 911, I haven't heard that in a long time. But that was all you needed right there. By the way, I'm officially 26 hours fasted right now. I said, you know what? I'm going to give it a shot. I know, Frank, you're so cool. I can't believe it. I just can't believe it. So if I seem a little bit extra sharp tonight, that's why. If I don't seem sharp, that's also why. So one way or another. Here's the first one up we have. I just wanted to throw this out there as a little bit of a I told you so. It's all too easy. It's all
too easy. That's not.
It's all too easy. That's a
terrible Darth Vader voice. I'm going to have to work on these. Headline from Zero Hedge: Radical left group demands that Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge to be renamed over racism claims. What did I tell you? Far left group Caucus of African American Leaders of Anne Arundel County, which has been on a multi-year rampage across Maryland and soon America, removing controversial statues and pushing reparations resolutions in Annapolis, has called on state officials to rename the recently collapsed Baltimore Bridge because Francis Scott Key is racist. And of course, he wrote the Star Spangled Banner, which became the national anthem that they're now very, very they want to replace, obviously. So I told you, it's easy to see it coming. So I will see you at the grand opening of the Ray Lewis Bridge in 2028, my friends. All right, let's see here. Here's another one for you really quick. This is from boundingintocomics.com. Headline: Reacher star Alan Ritchson baffled at religious support for Donald Trump. Quote, he's a rapist and a con man, and yet the entire Christian church seems to treat him like he's their poster child. I mean, this was a little... I just can't believe it. I can't believe it. I guess I could believe it. But to talk about not knowing who your fucking audience is. Talk about not knowing who your audience is. Anybody tuning into Reacher. Now, I just had taken a chance on the first season, and it was pretty decent. And I was going to watch the second season at some point. I think I'll skip that and just maintain my distance from this nonsense. But anyway, so the jury is still out on whether or not Alan Ritchson puts Tren in his protein shakes, but now we know for sure that he's getting his news from The View, which is embarrassing for an adult male who makes a living off of pretending that he's some kind of a Sigma badass. embarrassing. Really, really embarrassing. It truly is. So, I don't know how you can ignore stuff like that when somebody ruins the plausible, I don't know, the believability of a character. Yeah, I love when actors shroud themselves in a veil of mystery so that you can actually give yourself a chance to enjoy some storytelling at some point, but whatever. Anyway, here's the O.J. Simpson headline. Dead at 76 after cancer battle. Obviously, there's a lot of theories as to how he got the cancer. But 76. Gone. O.J. Simpson. Like I said, all you need to know about the situation is the Nicole Brown 911 call. If you haven't heard it in a couple of decades, please. So he escaped earthly punishment for 30 years. Although I read that at the time of his death, he still owes over $100 million to victims' families because, he lost all those civil trials. So he escaped earthly punishment for 30 years. And now it's between him and his creator. So who knows? Just one of those things, the O.J. Simpson thing. O.J. Simpson as an athlete, then an actor, and then a major television reality show star for a brutal, brutal murder. That's just always been something that we've been living with. We're talking about decades now of this just always being a major point, a cultural something. It's like a gravity well. Just crazy. It's all over. Anyway, there's that. I won't be making any jokes. All the jokes that there are to be made have already been made by Norm Macdonald. Those are the only ones worthy of listening to. Go ahead. All right. So with that, we're going to get this one kicked off. I have a couple things to read before Mike King gets on. So stick around, stay with us, and we will be, my friends, right back.
Right after the break, we're going to interview Eric Weihenmayer, who climbed the highest mountain in the world, Mount Everest. But he's gay. He's blind. So we'll hear about that coming up.
Okay, as we head to the break, a look at the 6 o'clock.
You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up. Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life. It's not about food. It's about keeping those ants in line. That's why we're going back. Does anybody else want to stay? Let's ride!
Yes!
I'm so scared.
All right. Man, one of the best theme songs ever. So appropriate, too. Okay, anyway, well, thank you guys and gals for hanging around past the intro. So, as you all know, we have Mike King of Profiling Evil on with us tonight. And, one of the greatest things that he does is they make these story maps about what's on their plate at the moment. I want to read this a little bit to you of what we're going to be dealing with tonight because it's a pretty rich story. Here it is. Hold on. Let me get this to the end of the... that's what we have. Listen to this. Okay, so it is a Latter-day Saints infant cemetery. And as you know, out there in Utah, there is a lot of stuff going on when it comes to these types of stories. Cult-like activity, religious organizations masquerading around as, I don't know, I guess masquerading around as a religion. And it's really just a brutal existence there. Babyland. Here's the opening. Tucked away from prying eyes for 75 years, the Hilldale Infant Cemetery holds the remains of newborn babies of the fundamentalist FLDS polygamist community. How many babies are here remains a mystery. If you ask a local resident, chances are that they won't answer you. Some suggest that there may be more than 250 bodies dating back to the 1950s. These are just babies. KSL Television reported the cemetery owner said that there are 182 infants buried there in the news report to the right. In 2024, Profiling Evil set out to map the cemetery and found 215 babies, and there could be more. The infants buried at the baby cemetery didn't have birth or death certificates. This violates state law, but nothing happened. The infant deaths were not investigated by state officials because the deaths were never reported. These children shouldn't be forgotten. The community and state failed them by not recording their lives and their deaths. Now, tonight, to talk about this, coming on again, is Mike King. Profiling Evil. King spent 28 years in law enforcement, nearly 40 in public and private leadership with a focus on investigative analysis and public safety IT systems. He's the creator and host of Profiling Evil on YouTube and podcast. He's a published author and appears regularly on Court TV, The Dr. Phil Show, News Nation, and other mainstream news and entertainment programs. He served a 5-year term on the board of directors of the Cold Case Foundation before stepping down in 2021. And today we have him back on Quite Frankly. I'm so happy. How are you, Mike King?
Hey, Frank. So good to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. When did we talk last? Was it like last May? I feel like it's been a year almost.
I can't remember, but it's been a while. Yeah.
And well, either way, I follow everything that you're doing. We usually keep in touch, especially as things are really, really crazy. I love here's the thing about this whole genre that you are really a very big part of right now, Mike, and going into the future, is that even when it comes to weather reporting, people are going to independent sources, not amateur sources, but independent media, professionals, people who are just going out there and they're taking advantage of the internet, and they're taking advantage of the ability to go out there and broadcast to people and engage an audience in the way that you do. And it's just bringing such quality programming to anybody out there without having to add it to their cable packages or anything else like that. It's really been awesome.
Well, that's really nice to say, Frank, but I mean, it's just the same as the kind of content you're putting out. I guess the thing that you constantly have to think about is, am I becoming that kind of goofy social media person that is more interested in clicks and likes and subscribers than I am about having authoritative information go out that you can back up? And I really try to do that, which makes me pretty dang boring to most people out there, except for those that really want to kind of get just a sense of, what do you think as an old profiler or as an old cop or someone who's been down this trail before?
I can see how that would be, that comes into play for people who want sensationalism and they want the spectacle. But, it only takes so long after spectacle, speculating, anything, building things up that never come to pass. You can only build people up so much without delivering a big bombshell before they just move on. So it's really good that I think a lot of people in your line of work, and especially you, we're talking about you tonight in your work, is they're a lot more level-headed, and you're managing expectations that people are actually seeing what the actual work that goes into this is. Especially, it has to be, last time you and I spoke, we were talking about the ability for people to jump the gun and actually ruin cases that might have some merit. So it's good to see that approach.
Hey, you're not a kidding. And actually, today, the last 3 days, I've been on the phone and texting back and forth with the mother of a young man who his body was just recovered. He was murdered 2 years ago, and he's been missing. And finally, the individual tied to the case, they can't call him convicted yet, but he showed law enforcement where the body is. And she's invited me to go out to the scene. They're still recovering the body. And I thought, man, what a great thing for views. But as we talked, I said, timing's not right. I'm not going to be the guy who goes out and gets in the middle of an official investigation.
And that's at the request of the family too, huh?
Yeah. I've been talking with Dylan Round's mother, and if you've watched the Dylan Rounds case at all, this young man started a farm about out in the very northwest corner of Utah, out in the deserty area. 19-year-old kid that wanted to go and become a farmer on his own, and he ended up getting murdered out on the farm. And he's gone for 2 years without being found. And finally, in a plea negotiation, the accused predator, a guy named James Brenner, gave up where the location of the body was.
Jeez. Wait, then do you mostly handle cases that are in Utah, or do you ever get? I know that you spend some time in New York. I don't know if that's just for media, but how often do you get pulled outside of the Utah state lines to do work?
I try not to do cases for anyone for pay, because I just don't want to get into that piece of the business. So now what I try to do is I just look at things that are online that are kind of important, or when a family member reaches out to me and says, hey, I got a lost loved one, and I want to promote their story a little bit. And I'll talk about that. And my goal has always been to help the public get rid of all of the noise that comes with the sensationalism and the ghost stories, and just get people to think like you do, objectively, to think about what is actually involved in this case, why might there be another side to the story, and how can I evaluate this case and make up my own mind of whether I think this individual fits some of the characteristics of a person who might commit that kind of crime, or somebody else does. And so you'll find on my channel, I spend a lot of time talking about behavior. My graduate work is in criminal behavior. And of course, I spent most of my law enforcement career interviewing serial killers and predators and sexual assault predators in prison systems and in live cases all around the United States. Since then, I've taught profiling around the world, and I get a lot of opportunity to go and speak. As I get older, I'm getting fewer and fewer, because I think you have a shelf life, and technology and frankly, smarter, better investigators come along and should replace you.
Well, you do what you can. You pass the baton, form some strategic partnerships, and just makes the world a better place, especially from that standpoint, because that criminal elements are always forming partnerships and passing the baton as well. So either way, you're talking about profiling. You're talking about this. You're talking about recent cases that you do, how people call you in to help gain some closure or whatever. But when you talk about this uniquely morbid case that you've been mapping out here with this baby cemetery, we're talking about a massive amount of lives lost that go back as far as 75 years. So this is something I'd love for you to get on, because not only is piecing together the puzzle of what actually happened here, explaining just why there's so many dead infants within a short amount of time. 75 years is still a pretty brief period of time relative to everything else, but I want to know what comes after that. So let's just start from the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about this the community that the cemetery is tied to, and how did this initially cross your desk?
Okay, yeah, I actually led the we called it the Ritual Crime Task Force in the Attorney General, in the Attorney General's office, and shortly after I broke up that cult that we've talked about on your show before, the Zion Society cult, the legislature had just gone through the process of allocating a bucket of money to look into these allegations of ritual crime. It was back in the early 90s during the satanic panic era, and a lot of people were coming back with what was later proven in some cases to be false memories of events that never happened, but through therapy, they came to believe they happened. And so our team investigated about 300 pretty bona fide cases of child sexual abuse, homicide, and they were all ritual crimes. So in other words, they had a common element of someone using religion as a guise. And at first, man, I walked out of here thinking I'm in Utah, and I thought every case I'm hearing about is has got to be somebody from the Latter-day Saint Church. And polygamy was one of those areas that we looked at in this case. And polygamy had roots in the mainstream Latter-day Saint faith back to the mid 1800s. And in 1890, the mainstream Latter-day Saint faith cut it off and said no more. Now, some people have wondered why that happened. In some cases, people believe that it was because the leadership of the church received revelation that said we don't need it anymore, and they were trying to replicate what was practiced in the Bible. And you can see going back to Adam and Eve, their family was practicing polygamy as things continued on and the world was growing. But the mainstream church cut it off. And when they cut it off, this group of dissidents who didn't want to stop the practice went to southern Utah and started forming a group that eventually became known as the FLDS, but it really was the nucleus of all of the polygamist groups that sprung out in Utah. And there are a number of groups. We're seeing shows still today that talk about groups like the Kingston Group or the All Red Group. In the case of Colorado City, Arizona, and Hilldale, Utah, it's a group called the FLDS, Fundamental Latter-day Saint Church. So this is torn off when they were all excommunicated and stripped of their rights of membership in the I better not do that. It looks like I send up a thumbs up.
What the hell? Wait, what did you just do?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I don't know. It happens, and I don't know what I did. Every once in a while, I see it happen. I get a little thumbs up that pops up. Or maybe somebody's AI in me, and they agree with what I'm saying. I don't know.
That startled me. Okay, keep going.
But anyway, so this group wouldn't agree with what the mainstream Latter-day Saint faith did and abandoned the practice of polygamy. So they started forming their own group, which eventually grew. In the 90s, when I was working on this ritual crime task force, I thought, man, everybody has got to be somehow tied to this Latter-day Saint faith tradition. But as I dealt with my counterparts in Chicago or in Arkansas, what I've learned over time is that's just a knee-jerk, stupid reaction that we all have, because predators are going to use the religion that they were trained with in their youth or that they practiced. If they're going to be a ritual predator that uses ritualism, God told me to sexually abuse you, and here's the scripture I'm going to use to back this up. And when I would talk to my counterparts in Chicago, they'd say, I'll tell you what, the problem I've got is everybody that's committing sex assaults and ritual murders are Catholics. And a Baptist guy on our national task force would say, or I mean, a guy from Arkansas would say, no, it's the Baptists that are doing it. And so we figured out that it really is regionalized and it goes back to the core training that people have. So you are going to reflect and do things like your parents did before you and things that you learned. And as you take that, if you're a predator and start to um, use it to hurt others, you're going to twist it and turn it enough to make it sound familiar, and yet you can then introduce your own bizarre belief systems. So we kind of drifted away from that. But back to this story, in the 90s, I started traveling into the polygamist communities on a regular basis, and the goal was to get in and try to find out about these ghost stories of child brides and welfare abuses and other kinds of fraud that was going on. And every time I came into this community, which I'll tell you what, Frank, when you drove into one of these communities back in the 90s and early 2000s, you had trucks full of men with guns following you around in town. There was no one would talk to you. You would stop at the grocery store, and in some cases, they wouldn't even serve you, let alone answer a question of something as simple as "How are you doing today?" But as I would drive around, I was always troubled by this little plot of ground that was filled with all these little babies who had died. And the thing that was so troubling to me was I could never find any birth certificates for these babies or death certificates, something that required a death investigation. And it haunted me my entire career. I couldn't get answers from anyone about it. Everyone seemed to kind of turn a blind eye toward the polygamy problem, not because they were supporting it, but this was, groups of 10 to 25,000 people that you just wanted to let them do their own thing. And we weren't charging people with polygamy back then, because if you did something like that, you'd have to probably go into every home in the world, because polygamy is just having more than one spouse. And these were all what they termed as spiritual marriages. So they'd say, oh, God told me to marry you. And I have this civil marriage, but I'm going to marry you under God's laws. So they would have, in effect, multiple sexual companions that they would be having children with. And if you were going to prosecute them, why not prosecute the guy that's catting around in any other place in the country?
Mm-hmm.
So it became a really difficult problem that was kind of just shoved aside. But as we worked it, that baby cemetery just continued to bother me, because I could never find any records or anything to support who those little tykes were.
So are all the graves marked? Or well, let me just ask you first. Now, do you have access? Were you given access to this cemetery? And because I know that you had reported that you found at least 215 babies. That is up from the slightly lower numbers that you had available to you before. So is this your own work, your own teams that are down there investigating this cemetery now? How are you getting access?
Yeah, so what would always bring me to New York was I actually worked down on Madison Avenue for an international company, and so I would come to New York. But I retired in January, and so as soon as I retired, I started thinking about these bucket lists of cases that I never had time to investigate professionally, because frankly, a 70-year-old case, you're not going to get anyone to prosecute it or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
There were no people wanting it solved down in the community, but the thing continued to haunt me. And so I decided I'm going to go and I'm going to do it myself. So I went to the city and I tried to get documents to support the names of the babies that were buried there. The city said they don't have any records. I tried to get a plot map of the cemetery from the city. They said, we don't have anything. I went to the neighboring town, because again, this was a border town, Utah-Arizona border, and they were all polygamists. And so they kind of shared records. That town said nothing available. when Warren Jeffs was arrested, if everyone remembers Warren Jeffs, the convicted child abuser who was finally arrested down in Texas and convicted of raping children. When he went to prison, the Attorney General's office went in and seized all of the property owned by the FLDS Church and put it into an escrow called the United Effort Plan. And in that escrow, one of the pieces of property was the infant cemetery. So I went to the UEP, and they said, we don't own the land anymore. And that really bugged me. So I went to the county and found out who purchased the land. And it was a 501c3 and kind of a side channel business of the UEP. And they refused to talk to me. And finally, I got to the top rung on the ladder at the UEP. And he said, listen, we think maybe there's 184 graves. We don't know for sure. It's private property. We don't want the ground disturbed. And we kind of left it at that, which I wasn't comfortable with.
No.
So I started just going into the property on my own time. I at first was very discreet about when I went in because, again, it's private property. And as I became more brazen, I got a little more used to going in the middle of the day. And there were people that would stop, take pictures of me, which is kind of an old trademark of the FLDS way of intimidating you. And I just called it like it was. And we went about, went about cataloging every single grave in the cemetery. Now, the UEP said maybe 184 bodies in there, but don't make it a big deal. And I had heard there's as many as 250 babies buried there, starting in the 1950s. I could only find a couple of graves, Frank, that were from the 1950s, but there's an entire plot of ground that now is smoothed out and covered that I have no idea if there are babies that are buried in that portion of the cemetery because there are no stones. The majority of the cemetery is without marker.
That's what I was going to ask you. Are all the graves marked? But now that I know that you're doing this on your own, the next question I was going to ask is if you had any chance to use some sort of a radar or anything like that to find bodies, to find any kind of chasms in the ground, hollow ground, anything like that. But there you have it. That's just some crazy. That's just from physical markers that you can see. It's over 210 or so.
215 that I can confidently say are graves. There's a marker, a stone with a name baby carved in it, something that would indicate that they have placed a child there and they are memorializing that child. Now, as some of the former FLDS members have left the FLDS belief system, apostatized, according to the term they use, and left, you can see that there are a few that have actually put a pretty nice little marker here and there. But most, as you saw when you look through the map, and I assume we'll probably show a few cuts of that later, these are pieces of wood with a name carved in it. I mean, you talk about the old Wild West. This is how it was done, and that to me seemed very disrespectful, but it might have been all that those little families could afford then. I think they cared about their babies. I can only assume that. But again, 215 that I was able to find. So what I did initially was I flew a drone at 100 feet and 150 feet above the cemetery and did a little crosshatch pattern to create a three-dimensional map so that I could see any changes in the terrain, anything that would be suggestive, and then went and just painstakingly went from inch to inch through that grave, determining what was there. You talked about ground penetrating radar. Again, keep in mind it's private property. The state isn't doing anything, the health department nor law enforcement. The question that it leaves you is, are there homicides that happened that have long since disappeared? And forensically, that creates some challenges because a little baby's bones, most of these babies were only a few hours old or up to a day or two old when they were interred there. Um, a baby's bones are very pliable, like a young green sapling,
Yeah.
not like bones like I've got now that are, if I bent them, they're gonna snap into a bunch of pieces. So those bones are more likely to deteriorate and leave less forensic value, especially after 75 years of determining, was there blunt force trauma, was there a hyoid bone that was crushed, indicating suffocation, or all of those things that we would traditionally look for in a homicide investigation. Really, that time has taken away that opportunity.
So is that where I should say your instincts bring you, that there may be foul play involved with a lot of these infants? It's because I'll tell you, the other information that I read from your story map over here, especially the fact that there's no death certificates, no birth certificates. I can't imagine that's legal in Utah. But also, I have over here the son of former Colorado Mayor Dan Barlow said the polygamous community destroyed the records many years ago under the direction of Warren Jeffs. Of course, you already talked about Warren Jeffs, but there we go again. Ordered destruction. I mean, that reeks. Destroying information reeks, and I can imagine that makes your senses perk up.
That's interesting you would say that, because part of my reasoning in doing this, and what I've always tried to do on the channel, is share things from a perspective that an investigator would have to go through. You have to have multiple forms of evidence in order to take a case to a criminal court. You can't just say, hey, somebody said they saw this happen. You got to have some forensic evidence or physical evidence to support that. There has to be other pieces of evidence that in totality support this idea. And so my first concern was, yes, are there homicides that have occurred, and why are these babies just being stuffed in the ground? One of the problems was the medical care there was actually quite good, but in the early days it was, and still through 2010, when Warren Jeffs ordered all sex to discontinue in the community, which caused this immediate halt in babies being born in the community. They had midwives, and if there was a child that was in distress at childbirth, getting to a hospital, which most often they wouldn't do anyway, would have been an hour drive, and calling out Air Med or something like that just wasn't happening in those groups. So I had to take into account what was the normal infanticide rate, the number of murders per 1,000 people, and the number of events in the community. I had to look at actual infant mortality rates across the United States and look at the numbers there. And when I started looking at those numbers, which again, it's a lot of swagging on numbers here, Frank, because they threw away all the records and they never kept records on anything else. So you don't, even kids today that are in those polygamous communities that are now apostatizing and leaving the FLDS church are coming out without a birth certificate. They can't get a driver's license. They can't get a job. They're having to do all of these basic things to prove citizenship in the country. And so there were no records really to tie this. But to keep on track, when you look at infant mortality rates, their numbers weren't out of whack with what's happening across the United States, including the spikes that we're seeing through the early 70s and the decreases. As I tried to be generous with the data, I could maybe get to the point that there were possibly 20% higher infant deaths in that community by population than across the country. And as you're showing on this graph, I mean, their numbers were matching the percentages of infant deaths per 1,000 people. The challenge is I don't know if all the people in that community were having babies, because some families had 25, 30 kids.
Hmm.
And and so some additional research that I did, I think that you're going to bring up in a minute, will be really what became important to me in looking at these things.
Well, and what research do you want me to go to in particular? Because as far as the story maps go, I have that up. But this one graph, this poked a well, not poked a hole. Well, yeah, I guess it poked a hole in a big theory of mine about, how could such a small community produce so many dead infants in such a short amount of time? Because it's one thing for a 75-year-old cemetery to have over 200 people buried there. But I'm sure most people who review the basics of the story would arrive at the most obvious question: what on earth creates this kind of a body count for infants? And so when I saw this, that it's, the per capita, it's really not outside of the bounds of normalcy, I started wondering, what the next questions there to even ask are. Is it, I guess what the causes are, what deformity, is it chemical, is it genetic, is there a lot of incest going on? You've brought up the rest. Is there any kind of a sacrificial or ritual aspect to it? But you tell me where to go from here.
Yeah, yeah. This is what I think is so exciting, and I think what the public often fails to do, because it isn't satisfying or answering the question in the way we've already theorized. And you think about the old Sherlock Holmes books by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I loved how he would always say that Sherlock Holmes' way of thinking was, he would say, it's a capital mistake to theorize before you have data, because insensibly you spend all of your time twisting the facts to suit your theories, rather than allowing the facts to unfold and help you create an answer or a theory to the problem. And so it was much like your first knee-jerk reaction too, of, holy cow, how do you have 250 babies in a cemetery in a community that's ranged somewhere between 1,500 people through most of the years to the 2000 era, when Warren Jeff's father, who was prophet at the time, ordered everyone to come to the community and live, because the year 2000 was going to be the return of their God and the end of the world and the apocalyptic moment. So you went from 1,500 people to 10,000 overnight. But during that period of time, the numbers kept saying it's not that far out of whack. And if you really try to be generous on the conspiracy side, like I said earlier, I was coming up with maybe 20% higher, which, if your baby's one of those 20%, that's way too high. So it really troubled me. But I walked away with the feeling that you had, Frank, and that was, okay, it still needs to be considered, but maybe it's not the answer to the problem. So the next one became, is it homicide? We know that people die by a couple of means. They die by homicide, natural causes, suicide, or I think those are the three basic ones anyway.
Yeah.
And when we look at these cases, you say, okay, then why else? And you hit it right on the head. It was, is there genetic issues and deformities that are occurring because these close societies don't allow outsiders in, which means they have to marry cousins and family members. And there was a wonderful physician out of Phoenix that came up and did a study, and he determined that many of the people in the community that he could examine, he couldn't examine the dead babies, obviously, but they had deformities similar to, I've just lost my train of thought of which one it is, and it'll come to me. But he came up with a disease tract called Fumar's disease, which again is a tangent line of, we see it in so many young people. Anyway, and that was causing deformities that led to early death. Well, now you see there's a genetic coding problem that could be creating problems, and it's evident by people who survive, who have similar looks that that are consistent with this disease challenge. And so then you say, now, how do you begin to figure out where they're coming from? Because there are families. I mean, I have a young man that I've talked to for a couple of years now from the community that had 34 brothers and sisters. So is it one person, a man who happens to be this guy with multiple wives that's carrying Fumar's disease, or is it somewhere else inside the chain that's creating it? But that made me want to look a little deeper. And so if you pull up that graph that you were looking at and just scroll down a little bit further, I think you'll see a graph that indicated the breakdown by family name of children who are buried in the cemetery. And this is something I don't know if anyone's ever done, but as I went through and figured out which children the last names were attached, I started to find a couple of interesting anomalies there. So if you can find that one, I'll look through mine real quick.
Yeah,
to
which
see,
one? I have a, let's see here.
So it's the first chart on the right as you go into that how it happened panel, and shows the infant deaths, and it shows a bunch of family names. It's a pie chart.
Oh, how it happened. Okay, let's see. First on the right, pie chart. Okay, gotcha. Let me open that
So
one
yeah,
up.
and if you click in the upper right-hand corner, there you go, you made it big. So here was something that I thought was really interesting is okay, you might have 250 babies in there, but look at what family names have the majority of the babies who are buried in the baby cemetery. And can we start to theorize based on this additional piece of actual evidence? This is something you can't argue. That last name of Barlow or Jessup or Jeffs, those names have a huge number of babies that are ending up in that cemetery. So if you think about Fumar's disease, then all of a sudden you can say, well, it's interesting. Was the carrier someone in that Barlow line? And if it was that broad of a pie chart or pie slice, was it the father who's impregnating all these wives that he's got? So again, you kind of use science to start answering some questions that otherwise you couldn't answer.
Well, not only that, but when I look at Jeffs and I see Barlow, Barlow being the biggest share of the pie there, and knowing that they, for so long have been so influential in local government, it's almost as if they, for me, just knowing as little as I do right now, just knowing this, it almost seems like this was a small colony, almost like a DNA seeding kingdom of theirs. It's just, look at that. I mean, the fact that some of the biggest names there are, well, the Barlow name just popped up not too long ago. You spoke to the son of Colorado City Mayor Dan Barlow. Is that the same Barlow family?
That is the same family. So isn't that interesting? And like the old movie used to say, it's good to be king unless you're throwing a gene that's killing babies.
Oh. See, you're talking about theorizing without data and deduction and all that stuff, and Sherlock Holmes. And the initial thoughts were, morbid and interesting as it is, but then all of a sudden you have this where, man, imagine that you're at the top of a heap of a small growing community. You're maintaining polygamist ways, and we can actually see perhaps through DNA evidence that you might have seeded the community with a pretty lethal strain of something. Yeah. Damn. Okay. But then again, with that, I know that you got into this not because you wanted to be able to bring legal ramifications against one group or another. Obviously, it's more about clarity and closure. But, if this is a polygamy, then, of course, the genetic aspect of it that's causing deaths, is there something there that is actually, actionable in a legal sense?
Yeah, I don't know if you can legalize who someone could marry, but from a practical standpoint, it seems, and I don't know why Down syndrome is the that gene FUMARS comes through the Down syndrome line, and it just struck me. And I apologize to everyone for babbling about that for a moment, but so the thing that I thought about is, if I'm a leader and this is a closed community, or now that it's becoming a little more open, that maybe it becomes an education issue where you say, let's do some blood tests on family lines. Let's figure out where those collisions are occurring, and let's see if we can isolate. I mean, I had a sister who died of apnea when she was 39 years old, and I I was immediately called in by the university to get a bunch of testing done to see if there were things in her gene pool that might be in my gene pool, to tell me how to be a little more careful. We hear it happening with cancer, forms of cancer. We see it in some kinds of mental health diagnoses where they suggest that it might be something that's passed from generation to generation. So to me, this is like, quit running from it. Let's embrace it, and then counsel these kids that, hey, you might be in love, but you need to acknowledge the fact that you are carrying a gene that could create a problem, and now make your decision based on some knowledge rather than just running out and wondering why your babies are dying.
Yeah, I know. And then, of course, there is the question that would take a whole lot of other work to really get to the bottom of, is, are these people actually really in love? Are they feeling compelled to get into these relationships? And because it's just a closed society, I mean, I know there's a lot of, when it comes to record keeping and things like that, I know that other semi-closed societies like the Amish, they tend to flout certain record keeping and whatnot, but they're that this is a little bit different than that. Hell, I wish I don't even want birth certificates and all that stuff. I'd rather be completely disconnected from everything. But obviously, there's another aspect to this that runs, congruent to normal society, and there is a generational abuse aspect to this that you have found, especially in that region, in that area, with these groups. So even though the data takes you to different places from where you start off, you can't shake that background completely. You can't shake,
Absolutely,
you can't shake it.
Yep. No, you're right, Frank, and there is no question. There's evidence to prove that some children were forced to become child brides to these old men who then sexually abused them. They could call it love, they could call it God inspired, but according to the law, which is all I've listened to for my career, is they were violating a child's choice. They were raping them, and they were impregnating them and taking away the opportunity to fall in love. I've talked to so many of Warren Jeff's wives, one in particular, his 67th wife,
Jeez.
who personally told me that, she went through these emotions, excitement that the prophet, someone who was next to God, would choose them, and the absolute terror of being a child and all of a sudden forced into this family situation of having sex and other kinds of things. Imagine how difficult that is for a child indoctrinated from the time they were little, because still inside there's something that says this isn't right, but they're being compelled to do it. So no, you are dead on in that regard. And I want to just say something, because I love being the devil's advocate with you, and I just love our conversations, because I get that there are a lot of people that say, I don't want my birth certificate out there, and it's not the country's business of whether I have a driver's license or not, or all these other things. But here's why it is important, is if the state had not failed in their responsibility of demanding birth certificates for little babies that were born, an acknowledgement that little life existed, that when they died, that there wasn't a document that said you have to have a death certificate before you bury this, and that death certificate has to have a doctor that says this child died by natural causes, or there's an autopsy, then you don't have a query, and a whole bunch of murders would disappear,
Oh, that's
and
true.
people would never know about them. So as much as we hate some of these things, there's absolute reasons for them. And this is what frustrated me so much about this particular baby cemetery is here's great proof that says there might be reasons genetically that these babies died. It might be medically that they weren't given the right kind of experienced people to deliver babies, or when a baby came in and was having trouble, there weren't emergency services to save them. Because think about all the people you hear about that say, I have a baby in the ICU unit, the NICRIC or whatever it's called, because it came too early. Well, if you don't have that and these babies are dying, we can either have a knee jerk and say, well, it's murder, or we can say, no, you got to have a reason to understand why that baby died. And you cannot bury it until somebody with authority has said, you've checked the box and we know why that baby died.
All right, fine. You convinced me. I think that I can see the use and the real value of the birth and the death certificates, but I still say, to hell with and burn the entire Social Security system down. Though I say don't bother.
Well, I just started Social Security, so I'm pretty grateful for it right now.
Hey, listen, I'm fine with your generation reaping this. I mean, you've been putting in for a lot longer than I, but we need to sunset this thing. So I'll keep the birth certificates, but please take me off the dole. So let me add, so real quick before we wrap up here, 67 wives though, Mike. There's nothing about that seems anything other than nefarious. I'm sorry. It's one thing. It's one thing for
80. She was number 67. He had 87 wives. And if you go back to my channel, folks, you can watch a video. We actually, just a few weeks ago, that 67th wife and I walked through Warren Jeff's home that was built for 87 wives. And we talked about the things that were going on in there. So
you see that's what I'm talking about. I know you said that community ballooned to about 10,000 people. But for somebody to have been married, maybe they're not all alive at the same time, to 80 women there, you're essentially...
Oh, they were all at the same time, Frank.
That is something more so along of herding sheep than anything else. That is, I can't find anything other than a nefarious community manipulation operation going on there. And of course, like you said in the beginning, the justification comes from a strange mischaracterization of God's word. That's horrible to be one of those 80. I cannot believe any of them have felt fulfillment through that arrangement.
Yeah, and the horror stories continue on. The children had memories of wonderful childhoods as you talk to the children, because there's a batch of kids around, and children don't know what all the alternatives are to living in a society like we live in. But there is an intense amount of oppression in many of those circumstances. There are some where they swear that it has been a nice life for them. So I try not to judge it, and I just focus on the criminal aspect then and now and say children deserve protecting. And I don't care whether you believe in your God saying it was right or wrong, children deserve protection. And adults deserve to be able to make choices, not be under coercive control. And so that's the thing that I always kind of went after.
Well, Mike, how can we obviously the Profiling Evil YouTube channel podcast? You're out there. You're very, very active. And of course, I linked you in the description of this episode, so people who already don't subscribe to you can go. Is that where we can put the notifications on over there and get the updates to where this case goes in the future? If you continue to open up new doors to new answers?
Yes. In fact, if you want to kind of a deep dive into polygamy, I've actually spent 12 episodes going back and exploring all of the things that were ghost stories for me, the baby cemetery, the different locations throughout the community. And you can go back and learn about those. And I'll be putting out a story map about the FLDS community in about 2 more weeks. And I'm going to end with the final episode will be a discussion around the secret caves where the FLDS were storing explosives and weapons in preparation for Y2K or the Armageddon that would come. No one could ever um, prove whether those caves existed or not. I was able over the last few years to take my former nemesis and turn him into a little bit of an ally. And the last episode will be exploring the interior of the secret caves of the FLDS. So go and join over. And one thing, if we could do it before we sign off, is if you would just flip down to the actual view and share map button.
View and share. Okay, view and share map button. Okay.
And on the top right corner, click on that expand button.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, right there. This is just a place. Yeah, get rid of that little thing there. This is the baby cemetery, folks, and this is the area that I flew with my drone. And each of those points on the map indicate a baby that was buried there. And if you zoom in on that center aisle and up toward the top there, you'll see, yeah, names start to pop up, and you'll actually see the grave marker on each of those graves on the left-hand side. So move the map down, drag it around, and you'll see those images changing.
Wow.
And you can see how these little babies were memorialized, which is pretty darn tragic, and the reason why I felt it was so important. And if you click on any of those points on the map or the image on the left, like go to that top left stone, you can go in there, and if you click in the top left corner of that, you can get a big pop-up of that headstone of that little I think it's William Spencer.
Yeah.
I don't know his last name.
Wow, Mike, this is really incredible what you've compiled here, and all of these story maps can be found on profilingevil.com.
Correct.
Wow, this is a lot. This is really, really amazing. And you do this for other stories too?
If you'll close that window out, Frank, as we kind of wrap up, I want to just go up in that center map a ways to, I want to just go to, you hit the Zitting grave, which is just a little further. Let's see, you should see one that says Zitting right in the middle there.
Yeah, I got it.
So click on that picture. This happens to be a young man who has 34 siblings that lived that I've become very close to. But if you close that out, I've made a link where members of the community, if you go down and click on the video button in that little window you're in right now, where members of the community can actually tell you about this infant. So those that are apostatized and out of the control of Warren Jeffs and the cult can tell you a little bit about that child. And we're slowly starting to see some of the families respond and hopefully add content to this map. So I want it to be a crowdsourced map that grows and lives. And I've made the commitment that if the city or the UEP ever does the right thing and publicly publishes the map, I'll take mine down. But until then, I'm going to just kind of stick it in their face. So,
well, I thank you for your efforts, Mike. And just before we go again, these story maps, you do these for a lot of other cases that you are working on?
Yeah, so if you pop up profilingevil.com on a browser, you can just scroll down and there's a link that says story maps. And in there you'll see things about like my experiences with Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, or other cases that I've worked and predators that I've interviewed.
Did you work O.J. Simpson at all?
No, but I know all the officers that did, and that's a guy who lucked out. Thankfully, they tried to get a glove to fit.
I know. I was 9, 10 years old tops at the time. I don't know. Maybe I was 8 years old when the Bronco chase happened. But either way, I remember being so young and watching that part of the trial, and he's putting his hand up with the glove on top of a rubber glove, and he couldn't get it on. I'm saying to myself, but wait a second, how are you supposed to get this on if you have the other glove on? I was a child, and I was like, of course the glove doesn't fit. Ridiculous.
I heard today someone suggesting that they need to reenact the police chase with the hearse as they take him to the cemetery and just have a line of 50 police cars follow.
So you knew guys that were actually in that pursuit, or that were working the case afterwards?
No, I know some of the officers that worked the case from detectives. Not the lead investigator. I can't remember his name now, but others that were involved that I've known over the years from LAPD. But
well, we got to go. We have to open up the time capsule one night, Mike. We got to talk about like the. Like Richard Ramirez, that's one I'd like to talk about. That's one of those cases that Dianne Feinstein almost ruined.
You're not a kidding.
Oh yeah, we got to talk about that one night. Yeah, we should do that and a few other. But anyway, you're giving me so much amazing stuff tonight. It was great hanging out with you again. Mike King, Profiling Evil. His link is in the description. Thank you for everything tonight, my friend.
Thanks, Frank. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
All right, take care. There you go, guys, and that is all for there. Now, listen, in the second half, we are going to take your calls, but I also have, we got to listen to some media. And I invite you all over there. Now, we got that and plenty more. You got to come on over with me to quitefrankly.tv, powered by Pilled and Foxhole. The Pilled link is in the description of the episode, and it's also shared all over the place on Quite Frankly official socials. There are people in the chat room that can give you links. It's 2 clicks. Come over, quitefrankly.tv, and we have wonderful O.J. Simpson Saga After Hours programming brought to you by our friends at All Things Art Bell on Rumble. So, Yeah. I want your opinions on not only everything we did right now, but what's about to come up on the other side of the intermission. So I will see you then. Thank you, guys and gals, and yeah, let's head over.
It's intermission time, folks.
The rest of the show is available exclusively at pilled.net. Follow the link in the description of the episode, get signed up, it's that easy. Or head on over to quitefrankly.tv, just press play. No paywalls, no censorship, no strings attached. So head on over, quitefrankly.tv, powered by Foxhole, and pilled.net.
It's intermission time, folks. Time out to press the like button. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome to intermission.
We'll be right back.
Yeah, intermission. Yeah, intermission.
You are now entering, Quite Frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Watch Quite Frankly and stuff.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
All my fellow Franciscans.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.